Okay, good morning. Right. So, let's make some progress. So where we are up to, we're actually, again, just to summarize, let me just get this angle right, there we go, I think that's a bit better. Yeah, so where we're up to is, we have two halachic principles which will underpin the idea that somebody who comes before us and claims to be Jewish, that we, broadly speaking, according to most Rishonim, we believe them. It's either based on Roiv, Ruba de Lesekamon, Kol Haboyim Lefonenu B'Toiras Yahadus Yisrael, Roiv people that present themselves as Jewish do indeed turn out to be Jewish. And the other one is, what's the other principle? According to the Ran and others, Milsa Da'avida Ligluye. Okay? Milsa Da'avida Ligluye, it is something that can be fact-checked, it is verifiable, something that it will come out in the wash, so to speak, right? Okay. So, that is true. So therefore, let's come down now, halacha l'maisa. Halacha l'maisa. And we're going to spend a little bit of time today looking at the more modern, for want of a better term, this century, well, I can't even say this century anymore, last century's poskim. And then hopefully by the end today, I will also get, I've printed out for you the formular, the protocol, the form that the Israeli rabbinate will ask you to fill out if you want to prove your Jewishness. And we'll come back to that, okay? So, let's start off today with Rav Moshe Feinstein, Gedolei HaPoskim of the last century, source 24 on your sheets. Mm-hmm. The story in Rav Moshe is talking about the following story. We are talking about, well, you'll see the story. Igros Moshe Even Ezer Chelek Aleph, Siman Vav. Ubedvar Masha'ein Raya Al Eim Ishtoi Shahoisa Yehudis. We're talking about somebody, a woman, that the mother of his wife, his mother-in-law, there's no proof that his mother-in-law was Jewish. Rak Mashehi Omra Levita Veloi Shehu Yehudis. The mother-in-law said to her son-in-law and to her daughter, she just said that she's Jewish. Now, is that good enough? Says Rav Moshe, Nira, Dila Toisvus V'Rosh, Yevamas Daf Mem Zayin Deba'odam Shabbat Amay Yisrael Ani Nemon. Somebody who comes and says, I am Jewish, Nemon, he's believed Mishum Dorei Vaboim Lefonenu B'Teiras Yahadus Yisrael Heim, because most people, as we saw, that come and present themselves as Jewish do indeed turn out to be Jewish. Einoi Davka, what does that mean? So first of all, we have here a very important definition from Rav Moshe. Einoi Davka shero'inum shomrei Torah u'mitzvos. This doesn't mean that we actually see them observing Torah or mitzvahs. That's not what it means. Elo af al amirosam levad shehu Yisrael. When Rabbeinu Tam is discussing a scenario of somebody who comes and claims to be Jewish, that claim doesn't mean that claim is substantiated or backed up by observant Jewish practice. No, sir. Very, very often this is not the case, as we know. But all it means is, so it's not the fact, shero'inum shomrei Torah mitzvahs. No, says Rabbi Moshe, elo af al amirosam levad shehu Yisrael, have a horov Yisrael. Even most people who come along and say, I am Jewish, even though they keep nothing, or practically nothing, they still turn out to be Jewish. Varum? Mishum de ba'akum lo yomru al atzmam shehem Yisraelim b'chol hamadinos. Because it is not a claim that any sane, rational, normal person would want to make. And in fact, let me stop here a minute and just interject something, an important idea, also based on the Gemara in Yevamos. When the Gemara talks about Gerim and Gerus, and the Gemara says that as follows, the Gemara says, somebody comes before us and says, I want to become Jewish. How do we respond? Do you know what the Gemara says? Anybody knows? The Gemara says in Yevamos that what we respond is we say, I'll put it in modern terms first. We'll say, have you seen a psychiatrist recently? In other words, are you feeling okay? Because to be a Jew, says the Gemara, and I quote, if I remember it, Balpeh, Einata Yedea, that Yisrael are dvuyim schufim umuturofim. To be a Jew is to be persecuted and to be hated for no reason whatsoever, other than you are a Jew. We are a byword for hatred. We have given words into the modern lexicon: Holocaust, pogrom. To be a Jew is to be gassed and butchered and thing at the drop of a hat. That's what it means to be a Jew. There's a folk song. There's a folk song. A guy called Tom Lehrer. I only remember this because I used to put this into one of my lectures for Seed. Oh, the Catholics hate the Protestants and the Muslims hate the thing, and the catchphrase is, and everyone hates the Jews. It's
yeah, I think I know.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But, we laugh because we can laugh at ourselves. But this is a reality. Jews are hated because they're pacifists. They're hated because they are capitalists, because they're poor, because they're rich, because they're warmongers, because they're pacifists. And you don't even need to have Jews in your country to hate Jews. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is a bestseller in Japan, even though there's no Jews, etc., etc. Whatever you hate, that is the Jew, Tolstoy said. So, true. So this is what we turn around. The Gemara says, this is our response to a would-be convert. We say, don't you realize that you just basically want to join the club of the most hated person, race on the face of the earth? Really? And if he or she turns around and said, I mustn't shout, get excited. If he or she turns around and says, Afal Pikain, they say, I know that, and I want to be part of this thing. Mekablin oisoi miyad, says the Gemara. You accept them immediately. That means in principle, if you get that. In other words, you're not joining because you're joining some, some Amex Platinum club, which is going to give you, thousands of miles and points and access to all sorts of exclusive offers for Thailand. No, you're doing this because basically you're signing up to be gassed, exterminated. If you get that, and you still want to be part of that club, you're in. Oh, by the way, there's a few details. You have bris, we have to be moidia, miktas kalos, miktas chamuros. Of course, that has to be a Kabbalah soul mitzvahs, blah, blah, blah. But the yisoid, essentially what it means to be Jewish, is to be hated. Or we have to turn it around, but it's not the time for a mussar shmooze. It's meant to be a halacha shia. It's to remain loyal to Hashem through thick and thin. That's the bottom line. Okay. To be in it for the long haul. That's a relationship. To be ne'eman. Yeah? Okay. Right. So, says Reb Moshe. Let's go back to Reb Moshe. So it's the fact that somebody says that they are Jewish is significant here. Why? Mishum da'akum lo yomru al atzmam shehem Yisraelim b'chol ha'medinos sheyodua. Goyim do not generally claim to be Jewish. Why? Sheyodua sheruba da'akum. Because it is well known that most Goyim, v'ulai kulam, and maybe even all of them, hem soinei Yisrael, they don't particularly like Jews. They would be ashamed to say that they're Jewish. It's not something you're going to be proud about. And therefore, if you claim that, there is a reason to believe you. Now here we have an interesting svara. Here we're talking about this guy's father wasn't Jewish. So it was a question, his mother was Jewish, but not his father. Kal v'chomer, a woman who is married to a goy, she'im hi gam kein akum, if she would have been a not Jewish, lo toim al atzma she Yisraelis. There is absolutely no logic for her to then go and claim that she's Jewish if she isn't. V'yesh laha amino l'masha omra shehi Yisraelis, and we should believe her. So Reb Moshe, it would seem, on the basis of this, Reb Moshe is giving us some more insight, some more color, some more depth to this concept of ruba. Most people who say that they claim to be Jewish are indeed Jewish. He's giving more depth and color to this halachic statement, and he does it on the basis of historical enmity, and therefore he says, Rov, this is the Pshat in Rabbeinu Tam, this is the Rov. Okay? It would appear, as a superficial look, just at this one little bit of Reb Moshe, without looking at his whole other, corpus of work, that one would not require anything further. Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog, in source 25 here, Heichal Yitzchak, argues on this. And listen to his svar. Avol ba'med dvarim amurim sheloi huchzak ba'avoisov nochrim. When is this so? When we do not know that his father is not Jewish. But if there is a chazaka, even only here that his father is not Jewish, even though it's possible that the mother is Jewish, Rabbi Yitzchak Herzog says a very, very nice svara. He says, hold on a second. Roiv haboyim lefanenu b'toiras Yisraelim end up being Jewish. But roiv non-Jews marry non-Jewish women. So you're asking me to say, so in a case where not somebody comes and says, I am Jewish and my mother is Jewish and my father is Jewish, but if there is the case of Rav Moshe, in the case of Rav Moshe, where Rav Moshe clearly will argue on Rav Herzog, he doesn't draw this distinction, but I just wanted to bring this to your attention. Rav Herzog says that there's a reisa, again that word, yes? Remember? There's a reisa, there's a question mark on this chazak, on this roiv. What's the roiv? Roiv people who come before us end up being Jewish. True. But most, on the other hand, working against that is another roiv. Most non-Jews marry non-Jews. And therefore, if you're saying my father and mother were Jewish, okay, then we just got the regular roiv. Roiv people who present themselves as Jews end up being Jewish. But if you're saying your father wasn't Jewish, then you've got another roiv going against you, which is most non-Jews married non-Jews. You see that? Let's look in the way he puts it. It's a good svara. Even if it's only his father who's not Jewish, even though it's possible his mother is Jewish, the whole foundation is now shaky. Most non-Jews marry non-Jewish women. And in the case, like in the case in front of us, says Rav Herzog, this requires very careful analysis and investigation. What are you trying to do by saying that this guy is Jewish, but his father's not Jewish? The children of most fathers who are not Jewish are not Jewish. So you've got that right against it. Sharuba Dalma is not Jewish. Maybe. And he says furthermore, you have another road that works against you. Most Jewish women marry Jewish men. You've got to look at this from both sides. There's a weakness. You see? Very clever. There's two weaknesses in this particular case. Okay, admittedly, it's a minority case, but I have come across quite a number of these cases where somebody's father, even according to their own claim, their father wasn't Jewish, but their mother was Jewish. It does happen. It's relatively, the cases I've come across, it does. I would say it's a significant minority. So I wouldn't want to put numbers on it, but it is a significant minority.
Rather Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women than the other way around, if we talk about mixed marriages.
Well, what's the person going to say?
No.
Then you're not Jewish.
I know, obviously.
You mean, does that happen?
Yeah.
I'm not so sure. Yeah, it does happen. Sure, it happens. It does happen. But that's not relevant for our sugya. We're talking about in terms of our sugya. You have now possibly two roivs working against this one roiv. Yeah. So therefore, Rav Herzog says, really, it's a suffix. It's a problem. Okay. So far, what have we seen today in summary? We've seen a Rav Moshe that seems to say, go along with the roiv, and perhaps it wouldn't require any further investigation. We have Rav Yitzchak Herzog who said that in a case where the claim is that the father is not Jewish, that creates more of a problem. Now let's switch to the other halachic principle that we're using over here, which is milsa da'avida ligluya. Okay? Now, what's the halacha with a milsa da'avida ligluya? Right? So remember, this other halachic principle was the ran, yeah? Milsa da'avida ligluya. How far does the obligation to actually go and be megala? Do you just say, it's a milsa da'avida ligluya, therefore we just believe it? Or is there some form of liability, some form of responsibility on the dayan, on whoever, to actually then go and research? What do you think? This is a ran in Psachim. I'll give you the background. Background is as follows. You rent a house on Yud. This is sugya, if you've learned at the beginning of Psachim. You rent a house on Yud Daled Nisan. Okay? You rent a house on Yud Daled Nisan, Erev Pesach, from another Jew. Can you assume the house has been had b'dikas chometz or not. Okay. Says the Ran, source 26 here. Garasinon b'Gemara, the Gemara we learn in the Gemara. Bo'ominei merav Nachman by Yitzchak hamaskir b'is l'chaveiroi b'Yud Daled. Somebody who rents out a house to another Jew on the 14th. What do we say? Cheskosei boduk or yein cheskosei boduk? That's the shaila in the Gemara. Do I say there is an assumption that the houses on the Yud Daled are already boduk? Because don't forget, the chiyuv bedika is leil Yud Daled. It was last night. Yeah. Is it boduk? L'may nafkamina? Says the Gemara. What difference does it make? So asks the Gemara a question. What difference does it make? What do you mean? What difference does it make? Well, it makes all the difference in the world. Says the Gemara. You know the difference is the leisei lahai denishayle. Says the Gemara. The difference is in a case when he isn't here, so I can't ask him. That's the Gemara. Let's go over that again. Shaila in the Gemara. You rent out a house on you rent out a house on Yud Daled Nisan. Do I assume that it has or has not been checked? Ask the Gemara, what difference does it make? Nafkamina is if the guy isn't here, the owner isn't here, that I can ask him whether he's checked it or not. That's the Gemara. Says the Ran. Kaloimar. The Ran says Pshat in Gemara. The Salamaske Kamon. Because if the guy who rents it out, would be here, Leinafkalon Minamidi, then there would be absolutely no nafkamina whatsoever. Why? Da'afilu, look carefully. Da'afilu ne'meches kosei boduk. Because even if we're going to paskin that a house on Yud Daled b'Nisan we can assume halachically that it has been checked. Kol heichad isa, come on. But if the guy is here and you could verify, if you could fact check, you see that? You can see where we're going with this. Even though it's a Milsa David Eligluya, you could ask him. And even if we assume that the status of houses on the 14th of Nisan is that they are already checked. But if he's here, you cannot rely on that. You would have to be mechuyev to ask him, Shailinon lei, v'loik samchinon ha'chazaka. And we would not rely on the chazaka. Why? The cholhecha, the efshel Birur, milsa mavarin on the halacha is whenever you can be mavarer, of course you have to be mavarer, you have to clarify. Ulefichach kosam rav al-fasi zal, perakama de chulin. And therefore he says, that's pshat in the Rif, in the beginning of chulin. The Rif says, the truth is, there is a Gemara, Chazal say, most people, let me ask you this as a question. What do you think is the percentage of people that pick up a knife to shecht a bull, shecht a cow? What percentage of those people do you think know what they're doing?
Most of them.
Definitely most of them, probably high into the 90s. Yeah, I would imagine.
Hopefully.
Well, hopefully. Now the Gemara says that it's a halachic principle. Roiv Mitzuyin Eitzel Shchita Mumchin. Most people who pick up a knife to shecht know what they're doing. So do we check? Says the Rif. Even though, says the Rif, Loi Samchin on this Roiv. When do we rely on this Roiv? If the sheichet shechts it and then goes to Hawaii and we can't get hold of him. Then we can rely on the Roiv. Aval Isa, come on. But if he's in front of us, loy samchinon achazaka ubadkinon. We don't rely on the chazaka, and we will check him. We'll check his knife. We will. So even though there is a chazaka, there is a roiv which you can rely on, but whenever you have the ability to check, of course you have to check. There's a ran. So here we have a halachic principle that even though something is a milsa David Eligluya, but if you can check. You need to. So this is going to be relevant in our scenario. So even though you may have all of these lovely halachic principles, right? But if you can, that does not absolve you from the obligation to call the guy in and to ask documents, etc. We'll have to see how far we go. That's another story. Okay? Mm-hmm. Sorry, that was actually based on the basis of, I said to you something slightly wrong. I said to you, this was on Misal Avidu Legluya. This was not 100% correct. This is actually on a roiv. Here, the Ran is actually talking about a roiv. The Ran is talking about the roiv or chazaka, which in this case is the same. Yes? So to be clear, because I was slightly misleading, I apologize, I didn't realize. The Ran is telling us that even where there is a roiv, whenever you can be mavarer, you need to be. Now we switch over to the other halachic principle, which is milsa David Eligluya. Does that also apply in the case of milsa David Eligluya? Something which I could fact check. Now, there is a svara. Somebody's not going to lie on something which will easily be found out. Yes? Milsa David Eligluya. Do I need to check or do I just rely on the fact? That's the next shaila. And for this we have a Chuvas Maharit. Source 27. Shilas Chubas Marit, Simon Kuf Memtes. Says the Marit. V'ulai k'shebo echod mimokoim yodua. V'omar koyin ani. He's talking about somebody who comes from a particular place and says, I'm a koyin. Ma linoisoi likre b'torah rishon v'lises kapov. We will listen to him and rely on him. He comes from a place that we know. Place that we can investigate. We can call up there and find out, tell me, is this guy a koyin? Right? Says the Marit, if he shows up and says, I come from a place which is, in his words, shiorois Matsuyos, which means there's good connections with that place and we can easily verify, then we don't need to, it seems, we don't need to check anymore, call him up for the Torah, treat him as a kohen. Right. Because Ein Adam Osei L'Shaker B'Kach. He is not the Svara is, he's not going to lie on something which will easily get found out. Shaloi Tehei Aliyosa Yerida. So that he doesn't end up with having a really bad time. Avol, this is the important lines we want. Avol. Kasheba, have you got it? He'll be with us. 27.
No, I didn't bring my sheet, so I'm listening.
There. Okay. No, please do. There are spare copies there brought, especially, so to 27. You look a bit tired, my friend. You good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. 27. 3 lines down. Avol kasheba mimokoim rochik. But if he comes from somewhere far, ve'eno yodua lonu. He comes from a far place where basically it's not easy at all to fact check. These anusim, whatever. They come from far. And they didn't show, interesting, a tiny little addition here in the Marit, which is very fascinating. Guy shows up, and, when we had now this wave of Ukrainians that came, so we had a very, very small number who came, and they came with a kippot, and they clearly were from, and they were from. Very small number. The vast majority who came, vast majority, you'd look at them. There would be no way of knowing, and by their own admission, they don't keep Shabbos, or they don't. That's their own admission. Yeah, that's. It's not a chas v'shalom, a criticism or a judgment, it's just a reality. So, we have no independent way of verifying. There are nusim that come eretz rochaika. V'loi no hagudas Moshe v'Yehudis. Loi mehemninon lei al pi atzmon, says the Maharit, who seems to be going along with Milsa Davida Legluya. He says, I'm fine with Milsa Davida Legluya, he says. But it has to be Milsa Davida Legluya. But if people have come from outside, somewhere where it's not easy to really get to verify their claim. And I must tell you, okay, we'll come back to that a little bit later. They don't behave as Jews, in the sense that we know, right? They don't keep anything, right? It was actually quite funny. Funny. So one group that we had, which we put up in a hotel, and the next morning one of them was quite demanding. She was quite upset that we had not provided bacon for breakfast.
Yeah.
It's ignorance. It's not judgment, but no. I'm telling you a fact. So they're pretty far from, at least that one. She was, that's what we heard about. She registered a complaint that there wasn't bacon for breakfast. Anyway. Interesting, hey? So, where they come from, a place that is where really we can't fact check, says the Marit, Loi mehamninon lei al pi atzmo. So just to believe it because somebody says so, sorry, ela al pi acherim, we need independent verification. So, he's not going along with the Rov. True, he's going along with the Milsa Davida Legluya. So if it's not Milsa Davida Legluya, then we have a problem. Let me tell you a case. Two stories. One is a story you may have heard before. You know the story about Rabbi Moshe Feinstein with the Aguna? Don't know if you know the story. You know which story I'm referring to?
I think I heard.
Yes? You want to tell us?
No.
Okay. So then I'll tell you the story. After the Second World War, as you can imagine, many of the Gedolei HaPoskim had to spent a lot of their time and energy researching Aguna problems. Right? We had it again with 9/11 also. And maybe that's something we can look into at some point as a fascinating topic. Aguna problem, because being married is a dava sheba'erva, therefore you definitely need proper edus to say that somebody has died. Yes? Or somebody And very often, so although ironically the Nazis kept incredible records. They documented their own inhumane practices. You know, these large leather folios with all proper copper plate writing. It's quite cruel, quite bizarre. So many poskim. You look at the Tshuvas of the Minchas Yitzchok, the Chabina, and many others dealt a lot with a lot of these Agunos shilas, very difficult shilas. And there was one, I forget who it actually was, I could look it up again, I could try and find out who it was, but there was one Chassidish Rebbe, Chassidish Pesach, who was very involved and gave many heterim. One fine day, a woman comes to Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and crying her eyes out. She claimed, she said, I'm one of those people that this Chassidish Rebbe after the war allowed me to remarry, and my husband has shown up. He managed to escape, he went to South America, I don't know, in a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades later, he shows up. In the meantime, she had remarried, so her children from the new marriage are all mamzerim.
Wow.
So what happened was as follows. The story we are told. Reb Moshe Feinstein, Tzaddik Livracha, was a very soft-spoken person. He was very humble, and he was a very soft character. He's sitting there, all of a sudden he became very agitated, and very uncharacteristically, he started shouting at the woman. He started being really quite tough and cross-examining her. Really, this Hasidic Rebbe told me, where were you? Where was he? And he started really interrogating her. This woman is in floods of tears. She's remarried. She may now have the prospect of her children from the new marriage being mamzerim, which is a terrible stigma. She was an Eishes Ish. She's done a terrible aveira without realizing it. She was in floods of tears. And the Talmidim were absolutely, Rav Moshe's Talmidim were flabbergasted. First of all, this is not like Rav Moshe at all, totally out of character. And secondly, this woman is having the most terrible time and he's being horrible to her. Anyway, Rav Moshe, they don't know what's going on. Rav Moshe persists in his cross-examination until eventually she breaks down and she says, I lied. She said, I made the whole thing up. She said, I heard that this Hasidic Rebbe was handing out in her, well, I don't know if it was her words, but she thought he was handing out heterim va'aguna like confetti, like candy. She said, and then I heard that he had just died, so I told everybody I got a heter from him. Now it couldn't be checked. He's dead. So they said to Rav Moshe, and Rav Moshe averted a big chilul Hashem for this Rebbe who was no longer alive, this Pesach. But they said to Rav Moshe, how did you know? How did you know? Ruach HaKodesh said, no. He said, I knew this Pesach, I knew this tzaddik. He says, when a yid of that caliber, who was so careful, he was matir hundreds of women. No, not once was he proven wrong. He said it smelt fishy. He had died not long before, and he said it just wouldn't be. The Rabbeinu Shalom Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mevi Takola LeTzadikim. Of course, it is possible a Rav can get something wrong. We're human, we're fallible. But in these very, very severe, serious cases, he said he was matir hundreds of women. No, not one husband ever came back. He would never have done something that he was not convinced. He would take Yahadus, he would work it out. He spent a lot of time researching. Rav Moshe knew. So, Milsa da Avida Ligluya is all well and good. But it has to be Avida Ligluya. I'll tell you another case. A case which I read in some based in files. A boy arrived from, I think it was in the 1960s or 1970s. He came from somewhere Central America, Honduras or somewhere like that. And he came as a young man, and he said that his mother's mother told him that he was Jewish. That's it. His mother's mother told him he was Jewish, and his mother's mother in Honduras had died 20 years before. As a young man, she told him he was Jewish. He doesn't know anything more than that. He doesn't keep anything, and he wants to marry a Jewish. So now let's examine this. What did the Beis Din say? The Beis Din said, Mimon Nafshach. If it's possible to research and investigate by calling up Honduras and finding out some community records, then I don't need his testimony. And if we can't, then his testimony is worthless anyway. You hear? And this is very often the kind of scenarios we are facing now. Especially when people arrived, I know because I was quite involved with some of these people that came from... So, when they arrived from Ukraine and somebody says, I'm Jewish and they're coming, so to put them in a hotel, to give them some money, of course we did. course we did. We didn't check any papers. Others did. Chabad did. And everybody does it. But for us, there was two. So for us, what I took the view, asked Poskim, took the view, the first thing is, people are showing up. What percentage of the people we helped were Goyim? Quite a few. But that's fine. And people who donated money to help people know that. They know that. It was ironic. All of a sudden in Ukraine, for hundreds of years, it was disadvantaged to be a Jew, and all of a sudden now you were a Jew. All of a sudden you could get on a bus, and you could. And it was advantageous, which means in no way would we rely on somebody who comes from Kiev or whoever and says that they're Jewish just because they say it. Certainly not, because that svara no longer applies. Absolutely, when there's a war and you're a Jew, and then you can get money come from Vienna, from London, from New York, from Berlin or whatever, and you can get out. You can get out of a war zone, and you'll know you'll be put up and looked after. The fact that they say it means absolutely nothing. Means nothing in and of itself, and it's also very, very difficult to independently verify. So we have managed some things. Some things it is possible. So where does that leave us? Where are we up to now? We've advanced a little bit further. Okay, we've had Rav Moshe, we've had Rav Yitzchak Herzog, we've got the Ran and the Marit, both of who say that whether it's the Rov or Milsa Davida Legluya, where you can research, of course you should. Now let's come down even further, Halacha L'Maisa. You with me? Mm-hmm. Rav Ovadia Yosef seems to have, in that tshuva, which we did a bit of the other day, seems to have a very lenient approach. This is not the approach that is taken by the Dayanim and the Poskim today, but we have to mention it. It was a Godel in Torah. Says that Rav Ovadia Yosef, source 28, Bahos Alkinon uBahon Achtinon. This is at the end of this long tshuva. He says, so this is how we leave it. Sheme'ika hadin ha'olim meRussia u'matzirim shehem Yehudim ne'emanim heim. Me'ika hadin, those who come from Russia and say that they're Jewish, they're believed. U'mikol Malkai. He does concede, if there is some indication, if there is any question mark, so he leaves the door open. He says, and really what he says is uncontroversial, because we saw Rov Rishonim do say that somebody that whatever the reason is, whether it's Milsa Davida Legluya or whether it's Rov Rishonim, and we do seem to pass in Halacha L'Maisa, broadly speaking, that if somebody comes and says they're Jewish, we do accept them as being Jewish. However, he says, if there's any question mark, now I would put it to you that there is a very big question mark on anybody who comes in the 1990s, anybody who got on a plane because the Sochnut would give them a plane, a way out of poverty in Moscow. Of course that's a question mark. It's advantageous to say you're Jewish. For the first time in history, it became advantageous. So the fact that they said, I'm not even sure if that Rov still holds true. By the way, according to the Sochnut's own, I'll get you the latest statistics. That's before we start with the Ukraine war, but the mass immigration, according to their own statistics, which, according to many others, the more religious feel it, they've massively underestimated it. They said a third of those that came were not Jewish. So you say, let's say 1 million or so came. So 300,000 for sure were not Jewish. That's by their own. So it's a Rov with I think Rabbi Ovadia Yosef would agree. That's a question mark. It might still just be a Rov, but there's definitely, say, a question mark. Okay, but be that as it may. Now we're going to get in the next paragraph in 29, you're going to get a fascinating summary of the Das of the Gedolei HaPoskim today. Okay? Mm. This is from a sefer called Orchos Mishpat Amud Shinayin, source 29. Lahalon Yutzagu. Now, by the way, look at the end of this paragraph. Do you see who it's quoting? Can you see the brackets? Yeah. You should know he is one of the biggest experts in Eretz Yisrael on this sugya. Yeah, and I actually have over here.
He gave a shiur.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, by the way, the shiur that he gave, it's this 63 pages. This I've actually paid for a subscription to Tchumen because there's no other way to get it on the web. It's okay, it wasn't so expensive, but just so that I can print out, I'm going to use it anyway. This is his shtickle Torah on it, and I actually do want to share a little bit more lumdus on it as well, okay, from him, because it's beautiful and it's very important as well. It's classic lumdus, and it will help you in Ksubas, because you're doing Ksubas, right? Yeah. It's going to be absolutely relevant to some of the stuff you're doing, Daf Tes, Daf is it Tesvav later and Chav Beis? It's going to be relevant for you anyway. So, we are now going to learn a summary, Rav Moshe Mordechai Feinstein's summary of some of the Das and Gedolei HaPoskim in this matter. The Das Hagon Rabbi Yosef Shalom El Yashiv to now Zatzal. Ein Rishus Lismoich Al Din Roiv. Rabbi Yashiv holds, and we can do the Lomdus maybe next week. We'll look at some of the reasons. Rabbi Yashiv holds, you have no Rishus to be Soimich for a Basin to be Soimich on the Roiv. Elo legabe kol mikra proti shevo lefanenu. You can only rely on Roiv, says Rabbi Yashiv, only when you have a specific instance of an individual who comes to you with a question, then you can rely on Roiv. Avol al manhige hatzibur u'ma'areches botei adin. But for those who make public policy in halacha, botei adin, muteles choiva lidoig levarer ad kama shebiyicholtam. They have an absolute obligation to be concerned and investigate as much as they possibly can, kedei shelo yisarvu goyim bekerem Yisrael, so that Gentiles do not make their way into Kerem Yisrael. Ve'ein lahem lismech lechatchila al din kol deporish meruba porish, and they may not rely lechatchila on the halacha kol deporish meruba porish. Remember, we said that yesterday. Anybody who comes out from a particular population, we assume that they've come from the Roiv from the Roiv. And here he brings a very interesting example to support Rabbi Yashiv's idea. Kishem shechoiv al hatzibur lechoinen ma'areches kashrus shetimona hachnosas peiros arlos l'shuk. Give me an example. A kashrus organization has an obligation to make sure that fruits of arla don't make their way into the market, even though most fruits are not arla. So why does a kashrus organization need to worry about arla? Just say most fruits are not arla. The answer is, it's one thing when you have a shine in front of you. Somebody calls me up and says, Rabbi, I bought orange juice. Doesn't say where it's from. Do I have to worry that it came from Israel? There you can say no, you can be Samech on Raiv. But should you lechatchila go and buy, would a kashrus organization give a hechsher on that? Of course not. Do you hear that? Mm-hmm. So there's a beis din that has an obligation to the tzibur. It's fascinating. It's really interesting in terms of it's a meta halachic principle. It incorporates hashkafa as well. A beis din, especially a beis din that has an obligation to do with, it has to preserve the standards within Klal Yisrael. So it could be that if in a specific instance you would be able to rely on a roiv, but imagine a hechsher of a kashrus organization that uses every leniency in the book. This is mutter because that's roiv, and this or that. It's not worth the paper it's printed on. There are products. I'll give you another example. This just to give you here, just here. There are products that perhaps I personally at home might use, but I don't allow them to be used in Brunstrasse in the kitchen. Huh. Do you understand? When you are doing kashrus for the tzibur, you have to insist on the highest. I mean, relative. It's obviously you've got to look at budget. But you aim for the highest common denominator. Yes. So, for example, I'll give you another example. I know that, for example, that in many people in the Kehillah are not makbid on Chalav Yisrael. Fine. But in the school, I will not let them use products that are not Chalav Yisrael. When they go on a school trip to Zusfein, they can't have milky ice cream, even though their parents let them. That's fine, go with your parents. But when you are on a school trip, because the school has to cater to the highest common denominator, not the lowest. You understand? Mm-hmm. And it's just a marshal. Give you a sensitivity. Rabbi Yashiv says this here as well. Even though it might be possible that if a specific case comes in front of us, we may have to indeed rely on a roiv and a kol porridge. But when you are setting standards for the tzibur, you are a beis din harabani. You have to have. We're not going to get time to go through this formula today, right? The protocol. If you want to, they have the following situation in Israel. You come from the former Soviet Union, the Sochnut. They'll stamp on you Teudat Zahut Yisraeli. Fine. That's what they do. You want to get married? Mm-hmm. Then this comes in. You understand? Let's quickly, 2 more minutes. Let's just finish this up. Kabbalah biyadenu, and this is really chaval that we should rush this, but we'll go over it again next year, whenever that is. Kabbalah tomorrow, no? Well, tomorrow we'll have shit tomorrow. Yeah. Kabbalah biyadenu, you know what? We'll leave it till tomorrow. because I want to go through this, because this is really Rav Moshe Feinstein's Kabbalah, which comes via Rav Pinchas Goldschmidt. You'll see the bottom of the next bracket. The three possible forms of identification from those that come from the former Soviet Union, documentation, etc., etc. And 2 out of the 3 is going to qualify. And we will see also Rav Kulitz, and we'll go down to a little bit more detail, halacha l'maisa, and we will probably kind of pretty much finish off this part of the sugya tomorrow. That will finish. Okay? Shkoyach. Thank you very much. Nice to see you guys.